It's a good line.
I like that.
It's a very good line.
All right. So what we wanted to talk about tonight, and I wanted to really get it clear in my own head because it's been a long time since I've looked at this, is that we know that there's a practice that when a person is not feeling well, and the doctors advise them not to fast, or they may already know themselves that they're not feeling well enough to fast, that they go to the rabbi, and the rabbi prescribes something called shiurim, which basically is, the rabbi will say, you can have up to an ounce of liquid, juice, water, together with up to an ounce of solid food, like cookie crumbs or cracker crumbs, compacted into a shot glass. The poskim are careful to say that you should use volume and not weight, okay, because things have different densities. You don't want to, and you want to be machmir on this volume of up to 1 ounce. And you can have those together, and then you can repeat every 9 minutes. Some poskim are even more makel, and they say, 4 minutes. But generally, what I've seen from most poskim is 9 minutes. In this way, a person is considered to still be fasting technically, and therefore is not violating the kares prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. And at the same time, they're getting sufficient nourishment. If a person were to do this multiple times over the course of Yom Kippur, they probably would get their full caloric intake for a regular day. I mean, if you can imagine that, you can, have, let's say, if it's every 9 minutes, so then it's at least 6 times over an hour, you're getting 6 ounces of orange juice per hour. I can't imagine you're not getting your caloric intake if you did that every single 9 minutes throughout the day of Yom Kippur, right? So it is quite interesting, and yet you're still considered to be fasting.
Actually, this doesn't apply to someone who's not diabetic.
Now, if a person is a diabetic, then it all depends the level of the diabetes. There are some people who are diabetics that this prescription won't work. And the poskim do say explicitly that a Rav has to know at least a modicum of medical knowledge to know when he should tell the patient, you should not fast at all. You're putter from fasting. The laws of Yom Kippur don't apply to you at all. So, for example, one of our members is undergoing chemotherapy right now for cancer treatment. I said, you don't fast at all, right? In other words, there's no reason for that person. That person qualifies as a chola sheyesh bo sakana while he's undergoing treatment, and there's no reason for them to be fasting at all. This remedy of Pachos MiK'Shiur, or shiurim for short, is given for people who are cholim she'ein bahem sakana, or a woman who's, let's say, pregnant or very pregnant and is about to give birth, and she has this deep craving where she feels like she's going to go nuts if she doesn't eat something. So the question, of course, is that many of you may have heard of this principle called Chatzi shir. Chatzi shir is whereby we say that if the Torah tells me that I'm not allowed to eat the meat of a pig, for example, what is the amount that Chazal understand is that I'm not allowed to eat of a pig? How much do I eat for me to be in violation of eating chazer? A kazayas, right? But am I allowed to eat a half a kazayas? Would that be permitted? So the answer is no. I'm not allowed to even eat half a kazayas. Is that a rabbinic prohibition, or is that a biblical prohibition that I can't even eat like a little crumb of a pig? Okay, where does that come from? So the discussion in the Gemara in Yuma talks about this discussion of Chatzi shir. Gufa Chatzi shir, this is source number 1. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asur min HaTorah, Reish Lakish Amar Mutar min HaTorah. So you have a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, whether eating a half a kazayas of a prohibited substance is biblically prohibited or only rabbinically prohibited. Rabbi Yochanan holds that it's from the Torah, it's Asur, and Reish Lakish says, no, it's only rabbinically prohibited, but midyoraisa, it's mutter. Now, what's the basis of each one? Rabbi Yochanan Amar Asr min HaTorah, Kevin Dechazi Li'itzterufe Isura Ka'achil. Here's Rabbi Yochanan's svara. Why is it Asr min HaTorah, even though eating is only really eating a kazayas? His answer is because you're getting started on an eating process which can be conjoined with another eating, and therefore the Torah is saying you must not do that. You must not do something that could potentially become a real full-blown consumption of a forbidden substance, because you could always conjoin this half a kazayas with another half a kazayas. Reish Lakish Amar, mutter min haTorah, achila amar rachmana v'leka. And Reish Lakish says that it's permitted by the Torah. It's only rabbinically prohibited because the Torah says lo sochilu. For example, you cannot eat a pig, but this is not called eating because it's less than a shear, less than a kazayas, and therefore you don't have an eating. So he's looking at it independently. Now he's not looking at the possibility of it being conjoined with another consumption, and therefore he says it's only asr midirabanan. Eisvei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. So Reish Lakish challenges, Rabbi Yochanan challenges Reish Lakish. You say that it's only midirabanan, but look at the following brisa. Ainli ela kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'azhara. Now you might think that there are certain things that are prohibited, but they're only prohibited when they are accompanied with a punishment in the Torah. So for example, the Torah says don't eat pig, and if you eat pig, you get malchus. Is there such a category of something that you cannot eat, but if you do eat it, you don't get punished for? That's really the question of the brisa. Koi v'chatzi shir, hol ve'eno ba'onesh, yachol eno ba'azhara. So therefore, the brisa gets two examples of things where it's prohibited, but there's no accompanying punishment. What are the two examples? If you eat the chelev of a koi. What is a koi? Anyone know what a koi is? Don't be coy. Tell me what your answer is. It's an animal that is a suffix, whether it's, yeah, that's right, Peter. It's a suffix whether it's a behema or a chaya. Now, the chelev of a behema is prohibited. The chelev of a chaya is permitted. So if I eat the chelev of a koi, I'm not sure whether I get kares or not, because I don't know if I've eaten forbidden chelev or not. It's a suffix. But then could you then argue, since there's no punishment, it should be permitted? Here's another example, says the brisa. Chatzi shir. What if I eat a half a kazayas of pig? I can't be punished for it because I haven't eaten the full shear, but maybe you'll argue that it's also not prohibited. So therefore, hoil ve'eno ba'onesh yachol eno ba'azhara, Talmud loymar kol chelev. Therefore, the Torah writes all chelev, including chelev that is not subject to punishment, but it's still going to be prohibited midrabana. So that's the brisa that shows. Rabbi Yochanan uses that brisa to prove that Chatzi shir is asur min haTorah, and Reish Lakish defends his position by saying no, it's really only midrabanan ukra asmach da ba'alma. So they each have their own way of defending their positions, but I just wanted you to see this back and forth between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. How do we paskin? We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan, that Chatzi shir is biblically prohibited, which leads us, of course, to the interesting question. What's the point of eating Pachos MiK'Shiur on Yom Kippur if it's still biblically prohibited? And by the way, how much do you have to eat on Yom Kippur in order to be subject to the prohibition? Kiko Sevis. What is a Kiko Sevis, Laser? It's larger than a kazayas, slightly smaller than a kibetza, which is twice a kazayas, somewhere in between. If normally a prohibited substance is asr b'kazayas, how do Chazal know that the eating on Yom Kippur is only asr b'kiko seves, when you eat a larger amount? So the answer is, and this is really going to really be the linchpin of our discussion tonight, is that Yom Kippur is unique because the Torah doesn't say thou shalt not eat on Yom Kippur. What does the Torah say? V'inisem es nafshoseichem. You shall afflict your souls. Afflict yourself by depriving yourself of food, which means that sometimes you could eat a kazayas, but if that's all you eat, you still feel afflicted, right? You still feel deprivation. The rabbis said, therefore, in order to no longer be a me'uneh, an afflicted one, you have to eat more than a kazayas. You have to eat a kikoseves in order to no longer be a me'uneh. Okay? Are we clear? So now the Rambam paskins, so again, the question is, what benefit is it to eat Pachos MiK'Shiur if Chatzi shir is asr min haTorah? How do I know that Chatzi shir, that we paskin like Rabbi Yochanan and Chatzi shir is asr min haTorah? Because the Rambam says, Ochal oshasa Pachos MiK'Shiur ze eino chayiv kares, afal pi shuhu asr min haTorah b'Chatzi shir, ein chayav in kares ela al kishir. So the Rambam says explicitly in the laws of Yom Kippur, Hilchos Shavisas Asar, which is the laws of Yom Kippur, that if you eat less than the requisite amount of kikot tevet, so you're not going to get kares, but you still have violated the Torah. So what's the benefit of eating Pachos MiK'Shiur? The benefit is I don't get kares. Have I still violated the Torah if it's not for medical reasons? Absolutely. V'ha'ochel o hashose chatzi shir makin oto makat mardut. And therefore, if a person, you find someone in the community basically saying, ha ha ha, I found a loophole to avoid having to really fast on Yom Kippur, I'll just eat Pachos MiK'Shiur, I'll have a chatzi shir. So we give him rabbinic lashes because you numbskull, you're still violating the Torah. And anytime a person violates the Torah, even though there's no prescribed penalty from the Torah for that violation, we want to make an example out of that person, and the rabbis are therefore authorized to flog that guy to make sure that people don't learn from him. That's what the Rambam writes. Okay, the Shulchan Aruch paskins, based on this discussion, keshema'achilin et ha'ubarot o et hacholeh, that when you do feed a pregnant woman who has a craving or a sick person, machilin otam ma'at ma'at kidei shelo yitztaref l'shir. You give them Pachos MiK'Shiur. And basically the argument is as follows. You're a chole. You should not be fasting because this may compromise your health. So you have a full dispensation to eat, but why commit the Isser Kares to alleviate your health if we can alleviate your health issue by eating Pachos MiK'Shiur so that you're not violating an Isser Kares? That's the argument. You'll still be violating the Torah. We can justify your violating the Torah by eating Chatzi shir because you're sick or you have a craving, which could potentially endanger the baby if you don't eat. But we're going to minimize the amount that we allow you to eat so that you won't commit an Isser Kares. Hilkach ma'achilon oto kebeit shlishi beitza benonit, and therefore you give him 2/3 of a kebetza, v'yisha kedei achilat arba'a beitzim, and then he should wait the amount of time that it takes 4 kebetzim, which, like we said, is the 9 minutes. V'hashetiya yifteku b'chola atzmo kamahu kedei shiyisalkenu l'tzad echad, v'yera'a kimel lugmav, and the drinking also has its own shear, which we also said is up to 1 ounce. Now, the reason why the food and the drink are not considered to be conjoinable. Like, why don't you argue if you're eating a 1 ounce shot glass of cookie crumbs and a 1 ounce shot glass of orange juice every 9 minutes? Well, forget about your diabetes. That's not going to be good. But let's say you're okay. You can take the sugar, right? Why isn't that considered a kikot tevet? Because
2 ounces of nutrients.
You got 2 ounces of nutrients. That's like 2 kezesim. So the answer is, and this is again because you are still a me'uneh. The definition of no longer being a me'uneh is if you have a kikot tevet of food or a kikot tevet of drink. But having less than a kikot tevet of food and less than a kikot tevet of drink does not fulfill yishuv hadat, does not make you feel, I no longer feel deprived. You don't get to that feeling. That's the reason why you're allowed to have a shot glass of each every 9 minutes. Now let's take a look at the Rivash. Yes, Laser.
According to Rabbi Yochanan and according to Rav Lakish, everybody agrees it's prohibited. It's going to be us, right? And so whether it's the Rabbanan or the Raisa, I mean, in the Rambam, you see, he clearly says that it's Asher min Torah.
Correct. He paskins like Rabbi Yochanan.
But in the Rambam, you could learn this very same din and say that it's Rabbanan. Like, where do we see in the words of the Shulchan Aruch that this follows the Rambam? There's no mention here that it's
how do you see from the Shulchan Aruch that he's going like the Rambam?
He's very well. In fact, you can make the case he doesn't choose the words of the Rambam. He seems to
yeah. Well, we'd have to go through the whole siman.
Okay, yeah.
I'm just going through one sif. Yeah. Right, but the Shulchan Aruch, the way that I've read through the poskim, the Shulchan Aruch is accepted that it goes like the Rambam, who paskans like Rabbi Yochanan, that Chatzi shir is asr min Torah. I don't have the whole text in front of me. Let's take a look at the Rivash, who's a Rishon, and has a fascinating tshuva. His friend the tshuva starts with a very flowery introduction, which I've totally skipped. He says, Sha'alta ala Yerushalmi shehu b'nedarim. You asked me the following question about a passage from the Yerushalmi in Nedarim. Nadar lihit anot v'shachach ve'achal ibei ta'aneto. A person took a neder that he was going to fast, and then he forgot about his neder, and he was with his friends, and they were all eating, and he ate. Okay, so the halacha is, says the Yerushalmi, you have lost out on your fasting, which means you did not fulfill your neder, you violated your neder, and presumably you'd have to do a makeup for that tinus. Okay? Now, the Kasav Alea Hara'ah, the Baal Hamor, comments on that piece of Gemara, and he says, the dafka b'sha'achal ki kotevet umiyom haKippurim yalfinan la. That's only if you ate a ki kotevet of food. Excuse me. But let's say you took a small bite and you said, oh my gosh, I forgot about my neder. So in that case, you're still considered to be fasting because you're still a mi'uneh. And this is what we learn out from in the laws of Yom Kippur. We apply that to any other kind of fast, including a self-imposed fast. Umidvarav nira lecha barur, da'afilu ochal b'mezid pachos mimiki koseves b'chazer v'ochal v'chazer v'ochal, kol sheshaha ben achila la'achila yoter michidei achilat pras, lo ava ta'aneto v'yatsa yedei nidro. And we can infer from the ra'ah that as long as a person waits the requisite 9 minutes, bichdei achilas pras, and he eats pachos MiK'Shiur each time, he's not in violation of his neder because he's still considered to be fasting. Ve'amarta sha'ata mefakfek harbei badin zeh. And you, my friend, the person who's sending me the Rivash, the letter, says that you are bothered by this. Devadai, mi shenadar lihit anot kol achila kabila le va'afilu pachot miki kotevet. He says, because if a person took a vow to fast, any kind of eating is subsumed under that neder. Kevin de b'yom haKippurim asr la'achlo, because on Yom Kippur also you're not allowed to eat even the smallest amount. Devadai af al gav deleka kare tu malkut mikol makom misura mihaika. Because granted, you're not going to get malkus for eating a forbidden substance if you eat less than a shear, but it's still asr min haTorah. Va'od damrinan behedja bibrachos, hashore b'tainis mahu sheyitom. And furthermore, the Gemara in Brachos asks the question, if a person is fasting, if a person has accepted a fast upon himself, is he allowed to taste food? Like take a small little taste without actually eating a full amount of food. Achila ushtia kabila le v'haleka, odilma hana kabila le v'ha'ika. So, the Gemara seems to be implying that at least there's one side to argue that ti'ima ba'alma, just a small amount of a taste, is considered to be fine because it's not really considered eating or drinking. Alma svirle dechol achila kabilav, but the other side is that when a person commits himself to fast, any kind of eating is prohibited. The kaven shekain eich yale al das loimar shelo avad ta'aneto v'halokim et nidro ad kan divarecha. And therefore, when a person pledged to fast, how can you say that as long as he eats less than a kiko seves, he's not in violation of his neder? That's what the person was asking the Rivash. You see that when you accept upon yourself to fast, you assume you're not going to be eating anything. So how can you say that he fulfilled his neder? That's what the person is asking the Rivash. Tshuva. So my response is, Kach nira vadai kamo shehivanta midat hara'a zal. So I'm going to defend the Baal Hamor. Baal Hamor is correct that if you just have a small amount and then you stop yourself, you're not in violation of your neder. Da'afim asa kain b'mezid v'kama pa'amim b'yom lo avata aneto. That even if you did this multiple times a day, waiting the 9 minutes in between each eating, you have not violated your fast. Demikol makom mit'anahu ela sha'asa iser. Sha'achal Chatzi shir b'mezid shu asar min ha'torah k'Reb Yochanan mishum dechazi litzterufe. You may have violated a biblical commandment, but you're still technically fasting. You violated Chatzi shir. Gedeita b'pirka batra diyoma. V'hu adin b'isur derabanan. She'asar lechol Chatzi shir b'mezid dechol t'takun rabbanan came to right to takun. Similarly, even a rabbinically imposed fast, like Tisha B'Av, or like Shivas or B'Tammuz, or Asar B'Tevis, Tzom Gedalia, etc. If you go ahead and you deliberately eat Chatzi shir, you're in violation of a derabanan. It can't be a doraisa because it's only a rabbinic fast. But we assume that rabbinic fast would have the same law. He says, now what? 1 second. What about your question? When a person pledges to fast, isn't he including all kinds of eating? So he says, Kevin shebiyom haKippurim asr min haTorah einza kushya klal. He says, look at Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur also, which is what Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were discussing. Technically, you're not going to get kares. You're still considered to be fasting. Shaharei im amar beferish shelo yochal v'lo yishte ein hakavana min hastam ela al shir sholem dilamachit inish nafshe lachatzi shir. Because when a person pledges he's not going to eat, he's not thinking about chatzi shir. He's thinking about the amount that I'm not allowed to eat when it's a fast day. How much am I not allowed to eat when it's a fast day? A kikotevet, a date-size amount of food. So that's what he's thinking when he takes the pledge. Ve'eno chayiv lo korban v'lo malkus ela al shir shalem elim kein mefarish chatzi shir. The only time we would hold a person liable and say that he violated his fast is if he took a neder where he explicitly stated, not only am I not going to eat, I'm not even going to eat a chatzi shir for this coming tainus, which you shouldn't do. Ki did the perik shavuos shtayim b'basra l'rabbanim depliga leid Rabbi Akiva kamen kavasai el shafal pishlo pirish chatzi shir hu aser al chatzi shir min haklal sheishlonu b'shari surin im l'Rabbi Yochanan min haTorah mishum d'chazi l'sterufei im l'Reish Lakish min d'Rabbanan. Certainly, you're still violating the iser of chatzi shir, but you're still technically considered fasting. Umikol makom hu lo aver al shavuaso she'ein achila pachos mikazayis. He says, but nonetheless, you have not violated your pledge. The kol shekain bekan shelo nada beferish al achila shimkein hayashiru bekazayis shu shir achila b'chol makom el nada lihit anot the kol shelo achal kekiko tevet mit anehu. And this is the key line from the Rivash. Remember, what does he say? He says, if you would have said explicitly, I hereby pledge not to eat tomorrow, so then you'd be in violation of your neder if you ate a kazayas, because all eating is a kazayas. If, however, you accepted upon yourself to fast, fasting by definition does not mean not eating. In other words, there's a difference between fasting and not eating. Not eating means I'm not going to eat a kazayas. Fasting means I'm not going to eat a kiko tevet, because anything less than a kiko tevet is a mit'aneh, is a person under deprivation. So again, that's really what I wanted to bring from the she'im lokein b'yom ha'kippurim yehi anushkaris taksiv ki kol nefesh asher lesu nevenichrasa ela detainis b'yetuvei daita tali k'de'isa hasam. And the explanation therefore is, as Chazal themselves say in the Gemara in Yoma, that the reason why the shear for Yom Kippur is larger than a kazayas is because it's all dependent upon the food helping you feel at peace, because you've eaten an amount that makes you feel no longer deprived. But if you eat less than a kikotevet, even if it's more than a kazayas, you still feel deprived. V'in b'kain b'kan harikim nidro, ela shafal pi ein imasu b'mezid asa yisr min hakol sheyesh b'yadenu shaneser b'shir shalom aser b'chazi yishir mishum d'chazi litzterufe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, fine. Yes, Elon.
It's usually, if I did a netter to fast, means food and drink. If I say I take a netter to not eat, does that mean I'm allowed to drink?
Generally speaking, eating includes drinking in the vernacular. I think the Gemara somewhere in the Dharm probably says that explicitly. Somewhere in my memory banks, I remember that. But if you explicitly said, I only accept upon myself to not eat, but I do plan on drinking, right? So then such a neder would hold. I was just speaking with someone today. He said, this is a big thing now. People are fasting for long stretches of time, let's say for like 18 hours, and they'll only have a window of 6 hours a day in which they eat. And apparently this is very healthy for the metabolism, and actually is very helpful in losing weight for those of us who need to lose weight. Okay, but that's not for now. Let's go on. Let's look at another shtickle from Shulchan Aruch, this time not in Hilchos Yom Kippur, but rather in Hilchos Tainus. Nadar lihit, number 5. Nadar lihit anot yom zeh v'shachach ve'achal mashlim ta'anesa. So the case of the Rivash, a person took a vow that he was going to fast. He forgot and he ate. So he has to be mashlim ta'anetu. He's got to make up the fast. V'hu hadin im hayatainis chalom o shayatainis tzibur o shahayayom yadua lo lihisanos b'yom shemes ba'aviv o rabo. And the same thing would be true if it's any other kind of fast. If you forgot and you ate, you have to go back and you have to fast another day. Aval im nadar lihisanos yom echad o shnei yamim l'cheshehischa lihisanos shachach v'achal kezayis ibeid ta'aneso v'chayiv latzum yom acher. But if you took a vow to fast 1 day or 2 days, or you and when you started to fast, you forgot and you ate a kazayas, you have lost out on your fast, and you're going to have to make it up. So notice that over here, this Shulchan Aruch piece disagrees with the Rivash and says even if you only ate a kazayas. So the Mishnah Berurah over here doesn't discuss the Rivash, but rather he says as follows. Aval Pachos mikazayas. What if a person just eats less than a kazayas? Now, according to the Rivash, it would have to be less than a kikotevet. But let's stick with the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. And if you eat less than a kazayas, more than a kazayas, you violated your fast. What if you eat less than a kazayas? Asks the Mishnah Berurah. After lechatchila asur lechal afilu mashahu mikol makom b'diavad mit'aneh u'mashlim. But nonetheless, the Mishnah Berurah offers the same svara that we saw in the Rivash. You're still considered to be depriving yourself, you're mis'ana, and therefore you can continue the fast and fulfill your vow. Ve'ein tzarich yom acher, v'asur lechol hayom yoter, kevin shekiblo b'tainus me'asmo v'yoser mizad afil ochal kazayis rak shel ochal b'pam echas, shal b'intayim yoser me'achilas pras lo mitzarif v'dinu kipachos mikazayis sheinu ma'abeh taneso bazeh. And then, so therefore, the Mishnah Berurah says if you ate less than a kazayas, you would not need to make up your fast another day. And I'll go even further. Let's say you had multiple half kazayases throughout the day, and you waited 9 minutes in between each eating. You would not have to make up that the fast. You've still fulfilled your fast because you have fulfilled the idea of privation, of depriving yourself, and therefore you fulfilled your fast. Now, let's look at some psak halacha. The Mishnah Achrona, which is written by, who's the fellow who does headlines, the Headlines podcast, David Lichtenstein. He wrote this sefer Mishnah Achrona, which brings piskei halacha from the Achrona. He says, Uvechatzi shir, af sheyesh bo iser deoraisa, ein bo chiyav kares kim levor b'shulchan aruch le'el, uve Mishnah Berurah. So, if you end up eating chatzi shir, you have violated the Torah, but you're not going to get kares. for eating on Yom Kippur. Zos va'od yesh shesavru shebachilas shir lo chatzi shir lo bitel mitzvahs v'inisem es nafsho seichem, that bichlal you have not violated the prohibition of afflict yourselves. Okay, ki me'achar v'lo achal shir shel yishuv das nechshav adayin me'uneh. So you're still considered to be a me'uneh, a person who is depriving himself. Omnam, but there is another opinion. He says, Yesh sesavar ki gam ba'achilas chatzi shir mevatel mitzvahs v'inisem. That even if you do eat a chatzi shir, you have violated the principle of v'inisem et nafshotechem, completely contrary to the Rivash and what we have seen so far in the Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so who is he thinking about? So if we take a look at the Meromei Sada, which was written by the Netziv, he states as follows. He's commenting on the Gemara, and he points out that this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is the pligi gam b'yom haKippurim b'chein hu b'hilchos gedolos. Avol, the Yerushalmi Trumos Perek Vav Mevur, Moder Reish Lakish, let's say, be'isr hana'a, Moder Reish Lakish b'yom haKippurim, Moder Reish Lakish ba'asid lahashlim. That the Yerushalmi quotes Reish Lakish as saying that Reish Lakish would agree with Rabbi Yochanan that if you eat Chatzi Shir on Yom Kippur, you are in violation of the Torah. And therefore, this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, according to Yerushalmi, is referring to other prohibited foods, not talking about eating on Yom Kippur. V'nira delo pligi, devadai afal gav de'eno asr mishum Chatzi Shir da'achila, mikol makom hareza bichlal iser aseh deta'anu v'initem me'achila v'ushtia v'hainu gam b'pachos MiK'Shiur. So the Netziv says a huge chiddush. He says that according to Reish Lakish, if we understand the Yerushalmi correctly, and it's not a machlokas, the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, according to Reish Lakish, it's not considered to be eating if you eat Pachos mikazayas, but it's considered to be a violation of the inisem es nafsho seichem, exactly the opposite of what the Rivash and the Mishnah Berurah have taught us. So that's one of the sources that Rav Lichtenstein brings to show that this idea that if you eat Pachos MiK'Shiur, you're still a me'uneh, you're still afflicting or depriving yourself, is not agreed to by everyone. Okay, so far you with me? Okay, so I just wanted to point that out, that this is not an agreed to principle. It seems like the majority of the poskim agree to that principle, but the Netziv does not agree with it. And he brings from the Yerushalmi, I can prove it, he says. The Yerushalmi seems to say that even Reish Lakish will agree that you're violating the Torah if you eat Pachos MiK'Shiur on Yom Kippur. Why? Because even though technically you didn't really eat, but you still have not fulfilled, you're still not a me'uneh so long as you have eaten, okay? Now, another kovetz called Sefer Kovetz Mishulchan Gavoa. It's again, a malakate of different shitos. Haprima gadim kasav she'ochel chatzi shir b'yom haKippurim mevatel mitzvahs aseh devi'i nisem. Here you have once again, not just the Netziv says this, but the Prima Gadim also holds that if you eat a Chatzi Shir, not only have you violated, you may have violated eating because you violated Chatzi Shir, but you've also are in violation of the Inisem because you're no longer called a Me'uneh even if you eat a Chatzi Shir. However, Ulam ha'achiezer sover shebeyom haKippurim, the Isser Chatzi Shir nisraba me kol chelev, lo mishum inoihu dahabi Yisuva da'ita talia, v'chol she'en bo shir ki koseves, harehu kime'uneh. But then he brings from the Achiezer, who lived into the 20th century, and he says that as long as you haven't eaten a ki koseves, you are a me'uneh. The kach kosav haran b'shem hara'ah b'perkama detainis, and then he quotes the Rivash that we just said. And he quotes then from Rav Zilberstein, Shlita, who proves from the Tzemach Tzedek, Shecholek ala prima gadim hasover shal achilas chatzi shir b'yom kippurim mevat lemitzvah sasei devi nisem, Dehiksha madua ein ochlim kazayas pas b'yom HaKippurim shechal b'Shabbos kidei lekayim mitzvah Shabbos shehi mitzvah deoraisa. He says, he asks a question on the Pri Megadim. The Pri Megadim says that if you eat a Chatzi shear, you violate the mitzvah v'inisim. So he says, it's an elaborate kasha, but the kasha basically is that the Tzemach Tzedek asks a question. He says, L'chora, when Yom Kippur coincides with Shabbos, we should have an aseh do chelos aseh situation. And we should say that the mitzvah's aseh of eating lechem mishnah on Shabbos should override the prohibition of chatzi shir, which is a lav greda, which is, kol chelev lo so chelu. It's only, there's no penalty for it. So a mitzvah's aseh is docha mitzvah's los aseh if there's no penalty to it. So why shouldn't we say that a person should wash, have a su'uda Shabbos with less than a kiko seves? And the fact that he even asks that question proves that the Tzemach Tzedek holds that if you eat less than a kiko seves on Yom Kippur, you're not you still are a me'una. You still are afflicting yourself. Fine. Now, stating that eating less than a kiko seves still makes you a me'uneh could also have a tzad chumrah. And this is brought up in the Sefer Binyan Shlomo. In the Sefer Binyan Shlomo, which is brought in this, again, a kovetz, some kind of journal, in source number 10, he has a chiddush. Kevin de mavor b'gemara d'isur de Yom Kippur hu mishum miyas v'daite. If the whole prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur is only eating something that will make you feel no longer distressed, which is why you have to eat a kiko sevis in order to no longer be a me'una, imkain gidra di isur mishum bitul ha'inoi. So the only time you're in violation of your fast is if you are no longer a me'una, you're no longer feeling deprived. Imkain kasher ochal chatzi shir harehu adayin me'una. And that's the reason why the majority of poskim say that if you eat a chatzi shir, you're still called a me'uneh. V'chasher mashlim hashir harei hashtahu mevatil ha'inoi v'chayiv kares. It's only if you eat the full amount that you're going to get kares. So here's the question that he asks. Here's the chumrah. Ulefizeh afila ba'achal chatzi shir be'erev yom ha'kippurim v'hishlam b'chdei achilas pras b'yom ha'kippurim l'shiur Kaven shekodem shehishlam adayin hayameuna ve'achshav bitel ha'inoi imkein hashta avar ha'isura dasher lo su'une v'chayiv kares v'chein kosav b'shut ksav soifer simin lamed aleph. So listen to this really interesting shaila that he asks. The whole violation of the Torah of breaking your fast on Yom Kippur is making yourself feel no longer me'uneh, no longer deprived. It's got nothing to do technically with eating. It's got to do with making yourself no longer deprived. So here's a theoretical situation. A guy eats half a kiko seves erev Yom Kippur, and then 5 minutes later, when Yom Kippur enters, he eats another half of a kiko seves. So it turns out that he only ate a half of a kiko seves on Yom Kippur, but that second half of a kiko seves was eaten within the shear of it's less than bichdei achilas pras, and so therefore he has eaten something that makes him no longer feel me'uneh. So he should be liable. He should get kares, even though he only ate chatzi shir. That's the kasha of the Ksav Sofer. You hear the kasha? There's tirutzim to the kasha, but in other words, it turns out that this whole idea of making a division between inoi and achila, whereas the Isser on Yom Kippur is making yourself no longer a me'uneh versus the prohibition of eating, you can get some, even though that sounds like it's a kula, it's a leniency, but the fact of the matter is that could also be interpreted in certain situations as a chumrah as well. And finally, let me see if there's anything else. I have the Marcheshes over here. Let me just go to the final thing. I just wanted to quote quickly from the Shmir Shabbos Kehilchas on page 3. Ein lahachil es hachayla b'shi'urim, source number 12. Ele imkein barur hadavar she'achila ushetia ka'ila tisapakna lo. You only are supposed to prescribe to a sick person that he should use shi'urim, like eat the shot glass, if you feel confident that that will be enough to sustain him nutritionally, even though he has an illness. Uvisafek yochal kedei tzarcho. But if you have any doubt, then let him eat normally. Tell him just eat normally. Kiragil b'chol yamot hashana, just like he does the whole rest of the year. V'rak min harega shuhu margish ke'eno tzarch od le'echol kiragil yochal b'shiurim. It's only if he feels that he could subsist on Pachos MiK'Shiur that he should abstain from eating and eat Pachos MiK'Shiur. And then the Shmir Shabbos says, Chola shemachmas chshash sakana tzarach lishtos olechol b'shiurim. If you have a person who's ill and he needs to eat and he wants to do less than the shir, aval hu mesugal lahamtin v'latzum kama sha'ot, ela sha'az yitachen she'yistarich lishtot olechol yoter min hashir, yadif lishtot olechol b'shiurim kevar baboker. So you have two choices, and this is really what Rav Zilberstein discusses in the Chashukei Chemet. So I won't go through the entire tshuva. The Shmir Shabbos says, what if you have a choice? So I qualify as a chola, and I'm allowed to have pachos MiK'Shiur, but I'd rather fast until chatzos, let's say. The only problem is that if I fast until chatzos, I'll have to break my fast and eat regularly. But if I eat from the time I wake up, I can have pachos MiK'Shiur and I'll be fine throughout the day. So which one is better? So Shmir Shabbos says, clearly doing pachos MiK'Shiur throughout the day, as if you start in the morning, is the better option than fasting until chatzos, because if you're going to be compelled to do a regular achila, where you're no longer called a mi'uneh, that's a worse sort of breaking of the Yom Kippur than eating pachos MiK'Shiur throughout the day. So therefore, that would be something that you'd have to, like, say, discuss with someone who's ill in your family. You know, what if we don't skip breakfast, Mom, and we feed you throughout the day pachos MiK'Shiur? You think you'll be okay? He says, yeah, I'll be fine. And the truth is, when you think about it, having, like I said, having an ounce of orange juice every 9 minutes, be fine, you know, assuming that she can tolerate that, you know, you'll be fine. Or you can fast until 1 o'clock, and then you're going to have to eat regularly because you're not going to be able to subsist on less than a regular meal. So, Chacham Einav Birosho, use your common sense.
We instruct 11-year-old girls and 12-year-old boys to do that second choice. In other words, fast after them. And then eat regularly.
Yeah, we do, Peter. You're right. It's a very good point. We do that to train them to fast. We tell them fast only until chatzos, and then you can eat regular. They're not fasting because they're not breaking their fast because they're a choila, because they're not mitzvah yet, right? So therefore, we want to get them to practice. Reb Zilberstein has a similar shaila. He says, what if I can eat less by having just regular meals versus eating more and eating pachos MiK'Shiur? So for example, he gives an example where he says, let's say I can eat throughout the day 200 grams of food in regular meal intervals, or I can eat 250 grams of food broken down every 9 minutes. Which one is better? Is it a numbers game as far as the quantity of food that I consume? Or is pachos MiK'Shiur going to be the overriding principle? And his maskana is similarly to what Shmir Shabbos says, as long as you can avoid becoming violating the inui of Yom Kippur by eating pachos MiK'Shiur, that's the preferred thing to do. So we'll hold it here unless there's more questions. As far as practical advice, I'm getting a lot of shilas, as I do every year, about whether a person qualifies as a chola. And it's not always so easy to know, right? There's a person who just called me today asking about their parent. Does my parent have to fast because they broke their hip, right? So it's very hard to know an answer to that. If a person has an orthopedic problem, do they need to? So I said, Pachos, MiK'Shiur, we could certainly allow. Person's in a lot of pain, they need to take pain medication, and that's going to require them to take it with water in many instances. So Pachos, MiK'Shiur, I have no problem. I said, but number one, I need to speak to your mother. Let's see how she feels, the pre-game, Erev Yom Kippur, and let's see how she's doing. And then we'll have to play it by ear. Okay, so hold it here. Questions, comments? Yeah. Ooh, excellent question. Did I quote that, Shaila? Hold on. Did I quote that, Shaila? That is from the Marcheshes. That's the one that we didn't do tonight. But take a look in source number 11. The Marcheshes is of the opinion, as long as you have eaten Pachos MiK'Shiur, you can still get an aliyah. He cites the Rebbe Kiva Eger, who says that he's not sure. Rebbe Kiva Eger leaves it as a suffix and thinks he may not be able to get an aliyah. But the Marcheshes feels that absolutely, using the Rivash's argument that you're still called a me'uneh, you still should be allowed to get an aliyah. Okay, very good. Shkoyach. We'll hold it here.